Jurgen Wasim Frembgen, and the moderator is Mr. Asif Noorani. Mr. Frembgen, Dr. Frembgen is no stranger to Pakistan and nor to KLF, and we wish him a very warm welcome, and neither to OUP, I would say. And welcome to Dr. John Keay, who is a historian, The Gilgit Game, a book that I've enjoyed reading. And of course, Asif Noorani doesn't really need a lengthy introduction, as he's so well known as a journalist, as a writer, The Tales of Two Cities, and also on Mehdi Hasan. He's an aficionado of classical Indian, let's say, subcontinental music, because the music is as much ours as it is India's, so why call it just Indian? So please, I'd like to welcome you on the stage.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor for me to be speaking and introducing Jurgen Wasim Frembgen, whose two books, both published by OUP, are being launched today in Pakistan. He is a man of many facets. He is a writer, an anthropologist, an ethnologist, and he is also into academia. He is curator of the Oriental Department at the Museum of Ethnology in Munich. He is also professor of Islamic Studies in the University of Munich. Music doesn't seem to forsake me at all. So he has been teaching anthropology and Islamic Studies at other German universities too. He is a visiting professor at the Ohio State University, at the National College of Arts, Lahore, and the Quaid-e-Azam University, Islamabad. Between you and me, I hope he doesn't hear me. I think he's an insomniac. He doesn't sleep. That is why he has found time to do so much work, because he has more than 100 publications to his credit. I must say that he has been monopolized by OUP in Pakistan, for as many as 6 of his books published in this country have appeared under the banner of Oxford University Press, Pakistan. My favorite, however, is Nocturnal Music in the Land of the Sufis. I shall ask him a couple of questions before I hand him over to John Keay. But let me introduce John Keay to this august audience. John Keay calls himself a history writer rather than a historian, for reasons best known to him. He is the author of some 20 books, another insomniac, half of them about South Asia, including his history of the English East India Company, which is still in print after 25 years, and his India history, a history which has sold over 200,000 copies. He has also written major works on China, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East. Once a history scholar at Oxford, he worked as a political commentator for The Economist and then for the BBC before becoming a full-time author. He is a medalist of the Royal Society for Asian Affairs, a fellow of the Royal Literary Fund, and he will be speaking at the Royal Geographical Society on Monday. This Monday, is it?
Yes,
coming Monday.
The day after tomorrow.
Okay. So, John lives in Scotland. He has been visiting South Asia almost annually since the 1960s, and he's here today courtesy of the British Council. His latest book is Midnight's Descendants, a hard-hitting contemporary history of South Asia since partition. So that much for these two gentlemen. both of them regular visitors to Pakistan, and I think Wasim, as he prefers to be called, he comes here more frequently, he comes to Pakistan, while Keay's loyalties are divided between India and Pakistan. Wasim comes only to Pakistan, is that correct?
Not fully correct. I also go to India, but just once a year.
Once a year?
And thrice a year to Pakistan.
Twice a year to Pakistan. Okay, thank you. So, you told me yesterday that you were a Sufi at heart. Now, what do you mean by Sufi at heart?
This is not part really of the topic of these books. I want to emphasize that I have
We will
written
come
so
to that.
much
We
about
will-
the Sufi tradition, and I'm some sort of also happy to be able to present to other books which are not so deeply going into Sufi tradition. There is one chapter also on a living Sufi saint, of a Majzoub type of saint in this book, The Closed Valley. But of course you are right to say that I consider the Sufi tradition as an integral part of Islam, and something which really warms the heart, which opens bridges to understanding, and not only to tolerance. I mean, I have heard the word tolerance quite frequently also quoted here at the festival, but I think tolerance, if we put it that way, simply means endurance, and I think we necessarily have to go beyond tolerance and to a reciprocal kind of recognition of each other, and to take a keen interest and curiosity in other people's lives and faiths. And this is what at the root of my heart is also a Sufi, a seeker in that way.
So, John, over to you.
I love these two books, and I was just wondering when Wasim was talking then whether his Sufism in some way informed his anthropological approach to the Kohistani people of the Indus Valley. They have a terrible reputation as ungovernable Yagistanis, and were the scourge of the area for centuries, really. And you have to be quite brave to go and work with them. But what strikes me so much from Wasim's book is that he has an extraordinary kind of delicacy about his approach to these quite difficult people. He's wonderfully candid and kind of discreet and careful to avoid upsetting them. And I just wondered whether that was informed by his Sufism and how it affected his ethnographic approach.
Yeah, I think ethnographic fieldwork, and particularly if it's self-reflexive also, it should be accompanied, it should go with respect, with paying respect to people, with being sensitive to other people's lives, to their values. And particularly in that part of Pakistan, I'm not sure if everybody of you is aware about what we are talking actually, because unfortunately the German edition does have a map, but we simply forgot to include a map in this book. And it is one of these valleys branching off from the river Indus to the east, and on the westernmost periphery of the Himalayas. So it's part of the Nanga Parbat wider area. We talk about Harban, which is in the extreme northeast of Indus Khoistan. And yes, you are right, it is a sort of tribal society. We can compare it to living conditions and to the code of honor prevalent in Waziristan, for instance. So it's not one of these former principalities and kingdoms in the north of Pakistan, in Hunza Valley, Gilgit, and Chitral. It's a segmentary society where there's a code of honor and shame ruling conventional behavior over there. And what the anthropologist actually does in his or her approach is to try to give a dense description of the people studied, so to speak, of a culture. and to interpret it, to see cultural context from different angles and perspectives. And what we could say, maybe what the ethnographer does is he makes the familiar strange and the exotic quotidian. This is what maybe is a difference being writing travelogues. We try to actually to go from a down-to-earth approach, try to reach deeper in a society.
But there must be occasions when you have to restrict your curiosity or withhold questions that you would really like to ask because you're concerned about the people's reaction.
Yeah, that troubled me really in the Skoistan, in Harban Valley, because I was aware about the kind of danger there. A friend of mine who has passed away, unfortunately, a couple of years ago, he must be well known to some of you, Adam Nayyar, who was a renowned anthropologist and maybe the most keen expert on Qawwali. And he was almost poisoned in a neighboring valley of Harban. And another British colleague who did research on the old fortified village of Sazin, he had to leave the valley every evening to stay overnight at a rest house in the Indus Valley, in the main valley, so to speak. So I was aware about the danger around there and not being able to ask all the questions I had in my mind. And I had to be careful, finally. And therefore, somehow also, this is the reason my visits had been very short.
But you've chosen to present your work there in the form of a travelogue rather than of an anthropological or ethnographic monograph. Why was that?
Yeah, it's not a full ethnographic monograph, not an anatomy of a culture which is almost complete. What we write is always incomplete in a way. We know that, and this is in particular it's a failed field work because I was there too short on 3 visits. So 3 din mehman, tisra din beiman. So that was always in my mind that I thought I was not strong enough. I didn't. You see, I was suffering from loneliness, having done long-term field research for my PhD before in the Hunza Valley, in Nagar. Not in Hunza, where there were small hotels and people around, in Nagar. And that is another story to tell, probably, my experiences. So it was tough and hard. I was, in fact, longing to meet people, to talk more freely with people. My Urdu at that time was also more than broken. So I was also grappling with the problems of communication at that time, and therefore it was much too short, actually. But the experiences were very intense, no doubt about it.
How would you compare Kohistan with the northern kingdoms we were talking about, Hunza, Nagar, and so on? I'm sort of interested in this question because I did a long time ago write a book about the explorers of the Western Himalayas, and 2 books in fact, and there was quite a lot about Gilgit and Hunza, Naga, Yasin, Chitral and so on, but I never actually wrote very much about Kohistan because it seemed that no one ever actually went there. It was far too dangerous. And I just wondered whether that was your feeling too.
Yeah, I mean, it was a challenge. By the way, let me start with a nostalgic moment that we both sit here. And yesterday when we met first, I said, I would love to disclose that we actually met before. In 81, 82, there was a fantastic bookshop in Gilgit by G.M. Beg.
Yes, I remember.
And it was an unbelievable kind of cave-like shop full of books up to the roof.
That's right.
With some objects of antiquity. It was like paradise on earth, like an Ajaib Gar. And
he was a charming man.
He was a charming man who vanished in one of these ill-fated planes. I think, that was an accident. A plane vanished. A Fokker friendship in the late 80s, I believe so. And he introduced me to you. And I was looking up to you because I knew your books. Of course, I mean, most of the foreign scholars who came to Pakistan, and that started, at least as far as the German research tradition is concerned, with Karl Yatmar, who also collaborated with Professor Ahmed Hassan Dani on the rock carving project in Chilas, and There are many scholars who came there, later on to other valleys. But of course, we realized that there is another picture to these kingdoms, to the centralized states over there. They're totally different structure in a way. And it was always a challenge for me, at least once, to visit one of these valleys, these tribal societies there. And in order to be able to leave the mountains, to open up to Punjab and Sindh, what I did later on, I had to go there. I wish I could have stayed longer.
But do you think it would have been much easier working in somewhere like Hunza rather than in Kohistan? I mean, presumably all these peoples are related in some way. They speak Shina in the Kohistan, yeah?
They speak the same language, but on the other hand, there were fierce, there was staunch Sunni people in, for instance, in Indus-Kohistan, whereas in the Hunza Valley we have Ismailis and Isna Sharif people. So there's also a divide in that respect.
Now, Wasim, you've paid 5 short visits from 1989 to 1997 to Harbin. Is that correct? 5 short visits. And I know it became very dangerous and you were caught in a crossfire. But aren't you curious to know what has happened after you left? Or after you stopped going there? What about the characters, the people? Some of really very lively people that you've painted in this book. Aren't you curious to know what happened after that? Won't you write a sort of sequel? Sequels are very much in vogue. I think it is Harper Lee who's written a sequel. So aren't you tempted to write a sequel or visit again and then write a sequel?
I mean, 5 visits is better than 1 visit, although they were very short. Usually what an anthropologist has to do is to stay for a whole year, which I completely failed to do so, that is right. But there's only one time on this earth, in this life, so maybe I was also, became really interested to follow other areas of research in Pakistan, for instance, on the living Sufi tradition here. And I thought that almost that these chapters would have been closed. I mean, there is a curiosity what happened to the people, but I think my family wouldn't have allowed me to return to that area, which in those days, in the late 80s, early 90s, there was that strong influence by Tablighi Jamaat, of course. But there were people really, one could talk with them. There was no problem at all. But of late, we came to know that there are very strong Taliban strongholds in Tangier, Darel, also in Harban. So there's a kind of radicalization over there, which, frankly speaking, prevented me also from returning to that place. And finally, I had, hopefully, I'm still on the way to find a suitable language for these kind of writings, because yes, from the very beginning, I think I published 1 or 2 small academic articles on Harban, but the experiences in Harban of nature, of people, of my host sleeping in the night with a Kalashnikov at my side, and who had showered me with lavish hospitality as I have hardly encountered elsewhere in Pakistan. I mean, hospitality is everywhere, but there was unbelievable also there. They have some very remarkable experience. And I realized that I couldn't use the kind of dry academic language, and that something had to ripe in a way. It had to get mature. So after leaving the field in 97, I didn't feel fit already to find a new language of a narrative, for instance.
So you went to Ajmer Sharif, you said. That's
yes,
the only shrine you visited in India?
Nizamuddin and Delhi and Ajmer Sharif a couple of times, yes, also.
Any noticeable change between shrines here in, say, South Punjab, in Delhi, and shrines in northern areas? Any change?
what has affected us when going on the pilgrimage to Sufi shrines in Pakistan are at times the bomb threats during the melas and the urs. We know of the cases, what happened at Rahman Baba, at Baba Farid, here at Abdullah Shah Ghazi, and always I have come repeatedly to Sevan Sharif, and that was also under these kind of bomb threats. And
No, but I think you would be safer than me because of my clean-shaven face. So you, with your complexion, you look more like an Afghan and closer to Taliban than I am. But nevertheless, it could be dangerous. What was you said you were inspired by Anne Mary Schimmel. Would you like to throw some light on that?
In fact, Anna Marie Schimmel had been a sort of mentor for me in the field of studying Sufism and Muslim art. But of course, she didn't feel very comfortable, frankly speaking, in Sevan Sharif. And she has some remarks in her works where she frankly expressed that that was not her place for her to go. And I'm also sure, I traveled with her, by the way, in '83 on the Karakoram highway, and she was fully confident that nothing would happen to her in terms of the dangerous way on the Karakoram highway. I admired Anna Marie Schimmel very much. And she was, of course, a learned person, a person inhabiting texts, whereas anthropologists are more at home in villages, at least.
You don't talk very much about the Taliban in The Closed Valley, the book on Kohistan, but you do talk quite a lot about the Tablighi. I wonder if you could explain what their influence is and where it comes from.
I mean, there are many people in the audience who know much better about Tablighi Jamaat. I think this kind of religious movement of re-Islamization, also of revitalization coming from Delhi in the 1920s and the early 20th century, and which is the biggest transnational movement of piety, of Muslim piety at all. But of course, I mean, we also are aware that members of the Tablighi Jamaat, some members also got radicalized after some time and joined other more extreme religious parties, I think. But this should not be really generally to condemn it. We have to differentiate about the Tablighi Jamaat. At least many people in Indus-Kohistan went down country, as they say from their perspective. We traveled to Pakistan. I mean, they feel so isolated or on their own in Indus-Kohistan. They say we traveled to Pakistan. It means down country to Punjab. And they're enrolled in madrasas, Akora Khatak, for instance, and others, and brought back this kind of teachings of scholars belonging to the Tablighi Jamaat. And definitely it has been a blow since long to remnants of folk religion there. We know about shamanism, for instance. This is almost totally eradicated in that part of Dardistan, of the north at all.
You also talk a lot about honor killings and blood feuds between the various villages and the various different classes or castes of Kohistanis. And you make the point that this tradition of blood feuds and honor killings predates Islam. I mean, in places like the UK and in Scotland, where I live, we associate honor killings very much with the Islamic community in the UK. But you're actually saying that these are nothing to do with Islam.
Yeah, I think this is fairly clear that honor killings or vendetta and blood revenge is not part of Islam at all. And the religious scholars in Harban also condemn it, and they say also, we do hope that Islam is going to reduce these kind of honor killings. And it is part of an archaic society, of a social structure dominated by male society, by men actually. It's a very masculine society. And yeah, it has to do with love affairs, for instance, and with land disputes, as it is everywhere, also in other parts of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and other parts of Pakistan.
Before we proceed further, I have a surprise package for the audience, which I'll reveal afterwards. But before that, may I request you to read one or two short passages from this book, from the Close Valley, but then if you feel like reading something from the Lahore book, you're most welcome to do that too.
Yeah, I have to warn you a little bit that I have selected a paragraph from the book which I used to read for a German audience, and where I'm sure to get a kind of smile and laughter, and I don't want to deny this to you. But it deals with a kind of little bit a delicate topic of Pakistani material culture, which is all well known to you. But just in case anybody wants to be sure not to be morally offended, he has still a minute to leave the hall. So the small chapter is part of a chapter where I describe encounters with young men in a hujra, in a man's house. And actually the bunch of people, my host had been the local school teacher, Yusuf, and there was a guy called Taus, the peacock, who was even dancing in the evening, and they were all smoking strong cigarettes, and it was almost like an intoxicated atmosphere there, and they were reciting poems and dancing, and in a very casual way. Okay. The small chapter is entitled Alif's Third Leg. The young man is called Alif Khan. Alif's third leg. Now you know what it is about. Forgetting the moralistic stance of the Tablighis, Taus and his friends enjoy forbidden passions this summer evening and sing one dance tune after another. Until Muhammad, who looks after our physical well-being, brings tea, hot, sweet, and very strong. While Yusuf's friends squat around the tray, something colorful glimmers between Alif's trouser legs, and then suddenly covered by his long shirt. Amazed, I stare at his lower body, follow his movements, and wait until he relaxes against a cushion. Finally, he raises one knee and briefly reveals a piece of material which appears to consist of bright tassels and little balls and falls down to his thigh. These are the two ends of the trouser cord which peers out. The white Pakistani trouser cord have a white tunnel seam at the top through which a 2-meter long cord is drawn and knotted in front. This drawstring is an indispensable accessory in traditional Islamic clothes. If the knot is untied and the trousers not held firmly in place, they fall to the ground immediately, leaving the wearer completely exposed, since, at least in that region in those days, underwear is uncommon and tends to be a Western import. According to manuals of Muslim etiquette and virtue, men should cover the intimate part of the body between the navel and the knee, and women should cover the entire body, with the exception of the hands and feet. A well-known saying is, the genitals should be secured by the trousers drawstring like one binds a horse by its legs. From that time on, I started collecting proverbs wherever I went. The drawstring thus serves as a kind of chastity belt, which in some parts of Pakistan, particularly for the bridegroom, is very artistically decorated with colored glass beads, ornamental tassels, gold threads, metal attachments, and even amulets and little mirrors. The blood red silken drawstring for women's trousers is not decorated but tied with 2, 3, or more knots on top of each other, while men usually content themselves with only a simple bow knot. Anyone who ties his drawstring loosely has a bad character, say the moral apostles. In any case, these tisri lat, the third leg, as Punjabis call the ends of the drawstring, should not be visible under any circumstances. But naturally, it happens nevertheless. Is Alif aware that this beautifully decorated drawstring is visible and thus violates Islamic norms? Is he trying to emphasize his attractiveness, or is it merely an oversight? Have his friends noticed this erotic underwear? Are they wearing similar works of art? Questions which cannot be answered. The necessary reserve forbids insistent questioning about sensitive, intimate details. Moreover, referring to such things explicitly would fly in the face of local values, the values of Pakistan and the Muslim world in general. My awareness of this decorative trouser cord has opened scope for secret, vague intimations. The ostensible and cryptic, hardly noticed, come to light. Erotic elements and sexuality remain included and covered here, while in Western society they are discussed openly. A high value is placed there on making connections transparent. It's almost a cult of transparency in the West, I would say. But here, leaving things unsaid is important, a fundamentally different attitude in daily life. Be that as it may, Alif's trouser cord has appealed to my pleasure in beautiful things and aroused my anthropological instincts. This would be a wonderful collector's item for our museum in Munich. The curator in me cannot help pursuing the matter. Discreetly, I take Yusuf aside to explain my interest. Amazed, he looks at me, but he nods without further ado and beckons to Alif Khan to come outside. It takes a while before the two return. Alif is smiling slightly, which I interpret as a sign of embarrassment. And Yusuf discreetly hands me a bundle of material, the drawstring. I give him a few banknotes for Alif, which does not really assuage my guilty conscience about having overstepped a sensitive boundary with this deal. For the moment, I brush these feelings off, grasp my trophy firmly with both hands, and then stow it away out of sight in my bag. Only in the next morning do I take a closer look at the trouser cord. The tassels consist of numerous strands, and the colored balls remind me of the blossom of an umbellifer. In the following days, I notice such decorations on drawstrings of other men in Harban, but I suppress my collector's desires. Unpleasant feelings gnaw at me. What did Alif think about this forced acquisition of an intimate accessory? Does he classify me as a perverse Farangi or as a madman? What impression does Yusuf have of me now? Will the story of my strange interest in trouser cords make the rounds? When I attempted to discuss the subject later with my friend Bilal, who had accompanied me from Chilas to Harban, I could only imagine the extent of my breach of a taboo. The topic was so embarrassing for him that he didn't even dare to pronounce the word drawstring.
Thank you. I think we should probably move on and just say a few words about your other book, which we have here, which is very different and is, there were two authors for it. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about the Lahore book.
Do we have enough time, or?
Yes, we've got half an hour.
Half an hour, great. Otherwise, I could also have done it in one sentence also. But,
okay.
So I was thinking of a word by Voltaire. He said, "We are only 3 days on this earth. Let's enjoy it." And this is what the book is finally about. I think it's about the dimension of leisure, of hobby, of mashghala, of enjoyment in this life. And I think being a German, this is something we really lack. we lack this sense of chit-chat, of leisure, of happiness and relaxation. And people in the West, they say to us Germans kill themselves during work and they don't know how to live. So there is a kind of, we miss something out. And therefore I always loved this boisterous culture of Punjabis, for instance. And if I would have students of anthropology, I would send them to Punjab to study food culture. And I mean, there are many aspects and dimensions of Pakistani culture which have been suppressed over the last years. Shima Kermani, just an hour before, she said that is such a great taboo on music, on dance, on the performing arts. We could include so many different kind of favorite pastimes of Pakistanis. And I mean, we have only selected Pahalwani. And I know the people from Gujranwala, they are going to ask me, why didn't you come to Gujranwala? Why did you focus on the walled city of Lahore? And then on pigeon racing and kite flying, which is sort of these three sports, I think, emblematic for the walled city culture of Lahore. And I think they are under threat by a kind of moralistic mindset by all over the Muslim world. We see that if we look to Mauritania, there is that film by a Mauritanian filmmaker last year, Timbuktu. And for instance, smoking is forbidden over there, in addition to music and other expressions. And you know what happens with the Daesh, with the IS, what kind of sorts of enjoyment they are also forbidding, playing domino, for instance, and even listening to the songs of Kulthum. So we both had been in the north, and we were talking about in the Hunza Valley when Muslim culture, there was a kind of Shia revival when the ulama went for further education to Iraq. And when they got back, they started building mosques on the main polo ground. The polo playing was abolished there in the 60s and 70s. And another case is, for instance, I went through, usually like a Khana Baduch, through Multan in the ancient Koop Bazaar. There had been a fantastic Karam Boat club there. It had to be closed in the, I believe so, in the 80s. So these kind of enjoyments are taken from us, and they are a veritable part of Pakistani culture. This has to do with the values of Pakistan.
Is the same true of cricket?
No, cricket not yet. That is
You say that these pastimes, kite flying, wrestling, and pigeon flying, famously brought the different communities in Lahore together. They provided a kind of bond between people of different religious persuasions. But is that true now?
Yes, I still think that if people come together for kite flying, or those people still practicing at the akharas in Lahore, and I realized that they're all not only Punjabis, there are also some Pathan wrestlers collaborating with them, being part of the same team. And it doesn't matter if somebody is Sunni or Shia. And that reminds us all of the verses of Bulleh Shah, that it doesn't matter who is Sunni, Shia. And he was also a Sufi saint or Sufi poet on the threshold between being sometimes Hindu and Muslim. This kind of syncretism, which is a lived tradition, this mixing of cultures, where the Swiss psychologist Gustav Jung said that folk religion in every culture is the secret backbone of a culture, and that should not be broken in Pakistan, I think. This kind of syncretistic culture which allows peace and respect for others, and a kind of having a common ground. And we should not forget that all these kind of pastimes were part of the melas. That if you read an Urs Ishtihar, where is the program of the mela, of the Urs is written down, so on the last day is usually full of kind of enjoyments and games to be played, and people come together, and women are also sometimes part of these enjoyments.
In terms of bringing people together, and we're talking about Lahore here, I was just wondering whether anyone in Lahore flies their pigeons to Amritsar or vice versa. Not a long journey for a pigeon.
Yeah, there's also a Secret Service taking care for the pigeons or something. A kind of monitoring of the pigeons might be to do so. But I was also reminded when I was reading the newspaper the other day and came across that that was, I think, the final, this issue dealing by the Herald last year, what happened last year in Pakistan, and the Pakistan the hero is Aitzas Hassan Bangash, who sacrificed his life while saving the lives of his fellow pupils in school. And he loved pet birds, for instance. He was he had a soft corner, a soft spot for having birds. And we know that children, if they are educated and also taking care for animals, it creates a sense, it gives them a kind of tenderness and softness which is needed in those days.
The piece on kite flying, which is obviously not a purely Lahore activity, all over India and the Middle East, West Asia. Kite flying is very popular. And reading your description of it, I was reminded, it sounded exactly like fly fishing. I first came to South Asia to fish in Kashmir for trout, and the descriptions of them preparing the kites and the lines and so on was exactly the same sort of procedure as you have to go through when you're fly fishing. You know, you select the right fly, like the right kite. You treat the line with a substance so that it doesn't sink. This is for dry fly fishing. It's a very kind of refined and delicate operation. And I just thought, again, you know, that ought to be more kind of internationalized. Why isn't there why aren't there international or certainly regional competitions in kite flying? Why isn't it been? Is there a board that regulates it in any way? Or
I think what comes to my mind when you talk about fishing, for instance, and the same as kite flying or pigeon racing, is about also a leisure where people take time to do things and who devote their time to a certain hobby where there is not just a direct outcome which is commercially interesting. Nowadays, I think all our actions and thinking is results oriented. And I see that even among the religious clerics in Pakistan, that there's a very modern Western rational mindset at work which says that you should not waste your time. Invest your things in banking and earning money and collecting money, sort of moneytheism in a way. And isn't it, for instance, my last book in Germany was about drinking tea, about tea culture, 1,000 cups of tea. And about drinking tea is also sitting down, what the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, said, you should eat when you sit, not when you stand. You should have your cup of tea or whatever in those days, and you sit down. There's no idea of a tea to go or to eating finger food somewhere in that way. Take time, pay attention to those to whom you are talking in that way. And this is also a setting which is needed to talk to people, which allows an encounter on peaceful terms. There is that proverb, I think there's a Pathan proverb in Afghanistan, first let's have a cup of tea and then we start fighting. So maybe this is a key.
So, thank you very much, Wasim, and thank you very much, John. I have a surprise package for you. There is, in about 4 hours from now, landed a gentleman who answers to the name of Firoz Dada. Firoz, will you come here and show your face? He is a corporate head of a company somewhere in America, in UK, but he's written an excellent book which has been profusely illustrated, Children of the Revolution. Why don't you just use 2 minutes to talk about this book before we ask the audience to question Wasim.
I'm sorry to gate crash your fantastic and most interesting discussion. Most of us lead our lives in a routine sort of way, We do most things the same every day. But one day, something happens in your life, which I would call a paradigm shift, and it can change your life completely. This book is about a paradigm shift. When you go into a room and something remarkable happens. We were traveling on a canoe in the most remote part of Burma, and in a most lovely setting, a beautiful setting, from a sunny day, thunderstorm, lightning, made us go onshore to an island. We landed there and we were given shelter by these Buddhist monks. And what we saw there changed our lives completely. We saw children being brought up in such an amazing way that I had never seen children before. Generous, dignified, in most adverse circumstances. So what happened there meant that we could learn from these children. How were they born like this? How were they brought up like this amazing way? And try and use this knowledge to apply it to our children, apply it to our everyday lives. So this book, Children of the Revolution, is about this journey, about this paradigm shift. I hope you buy it. And I'll tell you why I think you should buy it too, is because all the proceeds go to the children of this monastery. Thank you.
So that book is available at which stall is it available there?
It's available, of course, at Waterstones in Piccadilly. It's available in Myanmar, but it's also available at Liberty Bookstall here. So
Achha.
please
So
buy it.
So it's available here. Anyone who buys it, make sure that he signs it, and this book will go on record. Two parts of this book are here. One part, the third part, where he brings about a big change, is freely available on the net. It can be downloaded. Thank you, Feroz.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much.
I'll happily give you a hug if you buy a book as well as a signature. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
And
Now,
Asif, I just wanted to say thank you for being a guardian angel.
okay, thank you very much. Well, questions to Wasim, please. Yes.
Going back to the bit you read about your book, I was just wondering, when Alif was required to provide, did he give a fresh one from his stock, or did he immediately dispense with the one that he was wearing?
No, he immediately dispensed with the one he was wearing. What kind of improvisation they actually did, I didn't ask that because I had to hold back some of my questions in that way. But somehow, yeah, all of a sudden, miracles do happen here around in that way. They must have found some sort of rope or a string of sorts, at least. And maybe I can add that the funny thing is really that this experience of, I work in a museum, so therefore my interest in material culture, I want to make sure that you don't get a false impression about me that I would just have my eyes on these things. But from then on I collected, of course, for the museum, but I used that trouser string as the topic of my lecture for my habilitation in Germany. For qualifying in Islamic studies, you need a habilitation. And I presented some of them in the front of the faculty, which some probably have never seen something like that. But it triggers to talk about these dimensions of normativity on the one hand and about chances to counter this kind of normativity.
Okay. Yes. Now the second question comes from Faryal Gohar, who is an eminent writer Uh, she writes books, she writes articles, and she's also a well-known figure on television and whatnot. So, over to you.
Thank you, Asif. I like the whatnot part. That's the best. The whatnot part. Salam, Wasim and Khushamadeen. That passage you read, I found it riveting when I was reading your book, and I enjoyed the book. I had some problems with that particular passage. So I'm glad you raised it, because I think this also then goes back to what Mr. Keay said earlier. The question about honor killings being part of the Islamic practice. Number one, the drawstring has nothing to do with Islam. It is not an Islamic part of the Islamic apparel, because we have to define now in terms of what is Islamic culture. And as an anthropologist, of course, you know that every few miles the culture would take on local nuances. Hindus wear a pajama, which also requires a drawstring. There are Christians who wear shalwars all over Pakistan and India. And so, this is not just, I'm not just being contentious, I'm just extremely curious. I think, you were very honest in saying that the life, because I work with Germans, as you well know, the life that you live in Germany can be, and if you'd forgive me for the very harsh term, but you yourself have said it can be rather sterile. Therefore, things which are old hat to us, and literally old nala in this case, is like, WTF, what the hell, what is all this about? Are we putting too much? This is interpretive process that goes on when an anthropologist comes in from the outside and brings with them the curiosity that is required. I'm just wanting to know, why is it that you think that we, as part of the post-colonial world, who have received educations in similar institutions such as yourself, at the University of Heidelberg or Harvard or Oxford, we have not expressed the same interest in your undergarments? What is this? We just couldn't care less, we wear your undergarments, but we really don't put any interpretive meaning to it. It's just a blooming thing in which you put your genitals. That's about what it is. So why is this the other way?
Yeah, the fact is, should we be shy and exclude domains and dimensions of life, and also maybe about sexual life, from dealing with it? That had been done in Europe in the early 20th century, when all these passages were written in Latin language, so that only a few selected could read it. They were very shy in talking about these things. But if you now go into, for instance, studies about dress, about fashion in Germany, there are some scholars doing this. They deplore that they have not paid enough attention to this, again, because they were looking another way. And of course, I agree. What I make sure is to send you the academic article on that topic, which is lengthy and had been published in a peer-reviewed journal. But it is widespread from Ottoman Turkey through Iran, the whole Near East, to India, actually, right? But wouldn't you agree that this is still, if we talk about dress in a general sense, Islamic or not, or covering, we can discuss for long, it is a kind of threshold between two parts of the body.
But no, I wouldn't agree, because the Arabs, to whom we now look as a reference point to everything Islamic, rightly or wrongly, don't wear a nala. They don't have an azarban.
They have,
wear nothing.
but
They
they,
have this jubba and everything hangs free.
the first proverb collected is from a scholar who collected that in the late 19th century from the Saudi Arabian Peninsula. So they had it in their dress as well there. This was the first proverb I was collecting.
They're wearing elastic pants now.
Yeah, now, but in old time it was of course not elastic. They were also making a knot, and it's about the knot, effectually. There's a mystery about the knot.
Christian kingdoms never had a drawstring?
Apparently not.
May I ask the
Okay,
question now?
last question, because we
No,
don't
they
have much elasticity of time. left. We're
Let me
talking of
ask
elastic.
I was just may
Who is
talk
the
about the
person
belt.
asking?
This
Ji.
young lady
Yes.
has been waiting for a while.
Last question.
Asif Saab, I disagree a bit because we have to talk about the belt also. And this is also in many cultures of the world we have belts and they have the same function actually.
Okay, okay. Thank you very much, Wasim. Stop calling me Sahab because Sahab is a man of wealth. I'm just a poor pen pusher. Yes.
This is more
My God.
a comment than a question. Seeing that you're an anthropologist and you're partial towards Sufism, I'd like to refer you to a book by an anthropologist in the US. It's called The Dark Side of Man. It's authored by Michael Guillieri. And if you read the book, which is based on his research with Jane Goodall and the chimpanzees, that provides justifications for all the kind of violence that is advocated in the Quran, you know, the hand-chopping punishment, and all the kinds of very serious violence in terms of punitive violence. If you read that book, that provides a perfect justification for all of that, and that's based on anthropology and totally secular work. Just a suggestion.
That sounds horrible in a way, right? Yeah. But my book is not about that. I read 2 pages. Maybe they were the wrong ones I selected, probably. But I wanted to engage with you in a talk. But of course, the book is about many other things as well.
Okay.
About history,
I think, you see, because we've already crossed the time, unless you have something apart from undergarments to speak about. What is your question about? Yes, very much there. He's going to sign it. It's there at the Oxford University Press.
It's not very much there. It is sort of at the OUP box, a bit back shelved, apparently. Maybe because of that passage, I have no idea. But you have asked to ask for the book.
Okay, so
Ask them.
one last question from the lady.
I have a question. Why is your name Wasim?
Okay, that's a good name. And why not double EM? That would have been phonetically correct.
We all have, or many of us have their multiple identities. And I mean, I came as somebody else to Pakistan when I came first in 1981. But with the passage of time and year by year and step by step, I feel actually at home, not as a second home, I feel at home here the same way as in Germany. I would love to stay longer here, but I'm chained to my job in a way, doing a kind of nokri in a museum. But yes, it's still a process of learning, of course, and I embraced Islam as well. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and thank you, John, for the brief moment when I was called by my wife for the grocery list that I couldn't have said no, so I had to go away. Thank you, John, for keeping the show going on, and thank you once again, Wasim, and thank you very much for the responsive crowd, all of you, and no thanks for that loudspeaker which was creaking from time and again. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.